We have spent our time among the silent witnesses of thought. The shelves here hold countless voices, thousands of compiled histories and theories. To simply read a volume is to stand at the precipice of understanding without ever having taken a single step across the chasm. It gives us immense weight on the mind, a beautiful, structured belief in what we know. But knowledge gathered from others' lives, preserved by ink and paper, remains inherently secondhand. Does the map itself constitute the territory? We ask this question every time we assume that merely grasping a concept is equivalent to mastering its reality. A scholar can recite the perfect formula for building a shelter in a blizzard, detailing angles of resistance and optimal wood grain. Yet, reciting the formula gives no warmth, nor does it provide the immediate instinct required when the temperature drops too fast or when the wind threatens to peel the roof from your back. The mind is capable of breathtaking architecture. We build entire systems of logic, intricate ethical frameworks, grand models of how humanity should behave. These systems are flawless when viewed from a safe distance, bathed in the predictable glow of contemplation. We can debate for hours on the optimal method, be it farming, governance, or simply preparing for hardship, and feel profoundly intelligent by the mere act of disputation. But existence does not abide by academic arguments. Existence demands adaptability. It demands resilience tested against friction and surprise. A theory is a comfort. Life is a brutal teacher. The chasm between contemplation and action can feel immense, even terrifyingly so. We risk becoming masters of the abstract, brilliant in our ability to hypothesize, yet brittle when confronted with the genuine, messy reality. When we leave the ordered quiet of this library for the unpredictable chaos outside, the theoretical knowledge begins to shed its illusion of completeness. The simple things become complex. How does one truly measure fear? We can read poetry about terror, analyzing meter and metaphor until the emotion is nothing more than a linguistic exercise. But knowing about terror is not the same thing as feeling the cold grip of sudden helplessness when everything else fails. The deepest lesson, I believe, is this profound recognition. The intellectual map is never the lived journey itself. It only points toward it. To claim knowledge without corresponding practice is to mistake a detailed diagram for a functioning engine. The diagrams are necessary starting points, but they lack the essential variable of friction, the actual resistance encountered when you try to turn the key in the lock. The stone felt cool and utterly indifferent in my palm. I held it up, turning it slowly, allowing the dim light to catch its unremarkable surface. And what was I doing? I was attempting an analysis of pure thought, a purely intellectual exercise designed to prove a point, yet it felt profoundly artificial. I spoke of feldspars and quartz inclusions, of weathering rates and molecular bonds. I recited geological textbooks in my mind, conjuring up histories that gave the stone depth and significance. I mapped its existence onto scholarly diagrams, giving it a pedigree it could never actually possess. The vocabulary was rich, impressive even, an eloquent parade of facts drawn from volumes of wisdom stored elsewhere. The challenge lay in acknowledging that this detailed intellectual construction held no necessary relationship to the cold reality before me. My mind had built a grand narrative around a simple, inert object. It was a knowledge entirely reliant on distance, the safe remove of study, of reading. I pressed my thumb into the surface, feeling only roughness. The theory demanded that I appreciate its full context, the tectonic forces, the millions of years, the chemistry of its formation. But this detailed appreciation remained trapped within the confines of my verbal reasoning. It was abstract. It was a ghost of understanding. I lifted my hand away as if casting off an elaborate disguise. The weight of the stone suddenly felt greater than its mass suggested. Because when I try to understand something purely by definition, by systemizing its parts and listing its properties, I lose connection with the thing itself. I treat it like a problem set solved on paper, rather than an actual component in the world. The empty hands exercise taught me that intellectual description is merely a map. It can be wonderfully precise and beautifully rendered, but a map is never the territory. It offers context and structure, yes, but it lacks the undeniable truth of being there. To truly know the stone, I needed more than the memory of its academic profile. I needed to engage with its mere resistance, its simple presence against my skin, the physical reality that defied complex labels. But knowledge doesn't simply stop at describing an object. It must move. And when we remove the object and the intellectual framework, what remains? Just the raw space between thought and action. This gap is vast, terrifying, and profoundly informative. We have journeyed through the realms of pure thought and raw action. We examined the map drawn in ink against the unpredictable terrain of lived reality. From the dust-covered scrolls to the weight of a single stone, we saw the separation between knowing something and actually being able to do it. But our exploration has brought us to a more delicate and perhaps more deceptive boundary, the passage of memory itself. The mind is often portrayed as an archive, a boundless repository where every moment of existence is stored perfectly, untouched by time or filter. We assume that when we recall a scent, a color, or a specific conversation, we are accessing the original experience directly, like pulling a flawless photograph from a deep vault. Yet, what if memory is not a playback machine, but rather an act of reconstruction? What if every recall is inherently colored by the self we are now, by the doubts and assumptions we hold today? Consider the vivid recollection of childhood joy, the pure, uncomplicated ecstasy of running through wet grass. We can summon the image. We can even remember the precise shade of green in that moment. But when we truly pause and examine that memory, what surfaces is not the original sensory shockwave, but a polished narrative. It is a story about an experience, filtered through years of adult understanding and longing. The mind does not save raw data. It saves meaning. And meaning is always interpretive. When we recall the taste of rain on dry earth, for instance, do we feel the exact ionized shock of that initial dampness? Or do we feel a nostalgia for that feeling, which is a fundamentally different emotional chord entirely? This brings us to the paradox of memory's map. Memory does not store reality. It stores traces of our interactions with reality. The gap between what was experienced and how we remember experiencing it becomes the space where philosophy can become dangerously inaccurate. We begin to treat memories as concrete evidence, solid facts upon which to build understanding. But they are porous. They bend, they stretch, and they reshape themselves based on emotional need or current conviction. If knowledge is built by accumulating these remembered experiences, then our entire self-concept rests upon a continually edited document. We never truly return to the original experience because the act of remembering itself alters it. The present moment's understanding colors the past recollection, making us co-authors of our own history. This realization is profoundly humbling, for it suggests that even our deepest anchors, our memories, are not immutable truth, but rather sophisticated narratives of survival. The weight of this revelation forces a necessary pivot. If we cannot trust memory to be an unadulterated record, how do we proceed? How do we establish a reliable foundation for wisdom if the tools of self-reflection are inherently flawed and revisable? The answer lies in accepting the impermanence not just of experience, but of recollection itself. We must learn to treat our memories not as factual recordings, but as suggestion, as poetic sketches of moments that have passed. They offer clues. They suggest a possible emotional intensity or thematic pattern, but they are never definitive proof of the original event. This insight dismantles a profound form of intellectual complacency. It teaches us that simply knowing our history is insufficient. We must learn to actively validate our present engagement with the world. The past, therefore, becomes less a fixed place of reference and more a source of cautionary context. We must ask not what this memory means in isolation, but how it informs the decision facing us right now. The map painted by memory is useful only when we are alert to its hand-drawn nature. It is a roadmap for potential selves, not an archaeological dig into absolute truth. The knowledge gained from understanding memory's fallibility demands a radical commitment to presence. It requires us to treat the coming moments, the scent of wood smoke right now, the texture of this gravel underfoot, with the careful suspicion and deep attention usually reserved for questioning historical accounts. If we take our learning journey too far into the rearview mirror, believing that past lessons are stored perfectly in recollection, we risk applying outdated assumptions to dynamic situations. The wisdom cannot be found solely in reviewing the archived self. It must be forged anew, minute by conscious minute, from the confluence of theory and immediate action. The burden of absolute certainty is lifted, replaced by a continuous state of mindful inquiry. This new understanding does not paralyze us with doubt. Instead, it liberates us. It frees us from the tyranny of needing to remember everything correctly. What matters instead is the pattern, a moment of theory, followed by a conscious pause for reflection on memory's limitations, followed immediately by an engaged action. Only in that unbroken circuit can true capacity, the wisdom of becoming, be established. We must learn not just what we knew, but how fallible our understanding of that knowing truly was. We spend so much time accumulating knowledge. We collect books, we master systems of thought, and we treat theories as if they were solid objects, finished and permanent. Yet, when faced with the unpredictable sweep of reality, how often do those neatly constructed intellectual frameworks fail us? This is the core question that defines our journey. Can sheer accumulation of information truly confer wisdom? Is knowing everything merely a comforting illusion? We have seen the map versus the territory. We understand that reading about a system does not equate to living within it. But theory itself can become a profound comfort, an intellectual shield that keeps us safely distant from the messy demands of action. It is far easier to predict hardship on paper than it is to endure the wind and the spray when standing directly in its path. The greatest mistake of the academic mind might be believing that knowing enough means being prepared enough. The Stoics understood this tension profoundly. They did not merely preach acceptance. They demanded action based on disciplined understanding. But there is a difference between predicting trouble and preparing for it. Prediction is an intellectual exercise. It involves charting potential futures, adjusting parameters, calculating risk based on what we have already observed. It resides comfortably within the mind. The preparation, however, requires sacrifice. It demands putting aside our comfortable certainty to engage with the unknown variable. Think of a storm approaching the coast. To predict its force, one can consult charts and historical weather patterns. This is knowledge. But to stand on that headland when the wind whips salt into your eyes, feeling the sheer brute force pushing against you. This is preparation. It changes the internal landscape entirely. We build our lives, often unknowingly, upon these predictions. We predict how a relationship will evolve. We predict the market cycle. We predict what success will look like after years of diligent study. We treat anticipation as achievement. But life rarely follows the elegance of our model. Reality is inherently chaotic, governed by variables that simply refuse to be neatly boxed and labeled. When we intellectualize difficulty, when we simply study a crisis, we diminish its actual weight. The book can never convey the visceral fear of true shortage, the gnawing ache of profound fatigue, or the acute necessity of making an instant judgment call when all resources are depleted. These moments cannot be anticipated with careful thought alone. The struggle, therefore, is not merely between knowing and doing. It is about aligning the two, about ensuring that our knowledge does not remain sterile, trapped behind the ivory walls of contemplation. Knowledge must serve as a guide, an inner compass, but never as a crutch. It must submit to the test of immediate experience. Consider the difference between understanding cause and effect through geometry and experiencing the fall itself. The theory teaches you angles, reality demands your balance. One is descriptive, the other is embodied. This gap, this widening chasm between perfect mental models and imperfect material existence, is where true education resides. If we approach life by only consulting our accumulated library of principles, we become brittle. We are excellent at arguing hypotheticals, but ill-equipped for messy humanity. A theory that works perfectly on a drawing board might fail spectacularly when confronted with human emotion or the unexpected flaw in material design. The flaw is not often in the principle itself, but in the assumption that every variable can be isolated and understood before interaction begins. We must redefine what it means to be prepared. To be prepared does not mean mastering every contingency. It means cultivating a deep resilience, a willingness to adapt when the perfect model inevitably shatters. It means integrating intellectual understanding with physical, emotional participation. The knowledge of endurance gained from reading is merely vocabulary, the experience of enduring that teaches muscle memory for the soul. The ultimate goal, then, must be to move beyond mere conceptual wisdom toward practical sagacity. Sagacity is not what we know. It is how well we respond when certainty vanishes and theory fails us. It is the fluid ability to improvise, to learn within the crucible of consequence. Our intellect gives us options. Only action validates which option actually exists in reality. Thus, life itself becomes the most demanding and irreplaceable university imaginable. We have traced the contours of what we believe ourselves to know. We imagined that knowledge was a reservoir, an inexhaustible well of facts held within the pages of books or within the meticulous archives of our minds. But if true learning is merely the ingestion of data, then why does theory often fail when confronted by the unpredictable chaos of reality? We learn about bridges. We study load-bearing beams and stress distribution curves. We can recall formulas that describe perfect equilibrium in theoretical models. Yet, knowing how to build something strong on paper is a vast canyon away from the messy, gravity-fueled endeavor of actually setting the first stone. We came here believing that adequate preparation was simply reading enough. We believed that understanding the rules provided an armor against failure. But as we have seen, knowledge detached from practice is nothing more than potent fiction. It is intellectual comfort, a soothing myth that allows us to postpone the moment of truth. For how much does knowing something truly cost you? Does it save you when the structure gives way, or when the sudden shift in materials defies all your calculated assumptions. The most elegant theory offers no protection against a misplaced hand or an unexpected draft. The journey thus far has dismantled our certainty. We questioned memory as a reliable keeper of truth and examined thought divorced from physical consequence. Now, we face the inevitable consequence: ignorance. Not the academic kind, where one simply lacks sufficient data points, but the profound, embarrassing ignorance that arrives when your beautifully constructed theoretical framework collapses in front of you, piece by painstaking piece. We set ourselves a task. We gathered materials for a small structural puzzle, a miniature bridge spanning an imaginary gap. Our initial approach was marked by confidence, guided by principles learned from decades of study. We consulted our internal library of civil engineering, and immediate theory suggested a specific, efficient arch design. Everything proceeded logically. Every calculation matched the standard form equations we carried in our minds. The theoretical process felt smooth, graceful, complete. Then we laid the foundation, and it failed. It did not fail with a dramatic educational crack that might be accounted for by known variables. It failed subtly. A small piece of wood, seemingly insignificant, shifted at an improper angle under minimal pressure. The stress was distributed in a manner our grand theory had never anticipated, a localized point of failure stemming from the interplay of slightly imperfect materials and human fatigue. The entire structure groaned, bowed, and collapsed into nothingness. It was not a moment of intellectual revelation, but one of visceral frustration. Our knowledge, so pristine and organized within our heads, proved utterly inadequate for dealing with the grimy realities of friction, uneven weight distribution, and the inherent unpredictability of matter itself. This failure forced a sudden, painful reset. The polished equations dissolved into useless vapor. All that remained was the raw puzzle in front of us: broken wood, shifting gravel, and the immediate need for something to span the gap. Our ingrained habit was to retreat into theory, to analyze the mistake from a comfortable distance. But this time, the failure demanded a different kind of education. It demanded the shift from contemplation to action. We tried again. This second attempt began with less abstract confidence and more grounded observation. We stopped thinking about the ideal arch, the perfect shape described by mathematics. Instead, we paid attention to how the gap itself influenced the problem. Were there natural contours to the gravel bed? What was the precise angle of the water runoff point? These were questions that no textbook could possibly answer for us. The process became messy. It was characterized by trial and error, a physical conversation between our hands and the materials. We built a low scaffold only to find it too flimsy. We attempted an arch with triangular supports, which proved unstable against lateral push. Each failure was not just a setback. It was a direct piece of information about the limits of our own understanding. The knowledge we gained that afternoon was not theoretical. It resided in the soreness of strained fingers and the acute realization of what does not work. The collapse of the bridge served as a brutal, necessary lesson. It stripped away the illusion that mere intellectual competence equates to practical wisdom. Understanding what is fundamentally different from knowing how. One can read about fluid dynamics until one understands it intimately, yet the equations offer no instruction on how to bail out a sinking boat when the wind suddenly shifts and the pumps fail. The knowledge remains beautiful, but impotent, and here lies the hard truth of the learning process. True understanding is not an accumulation of facts. It is a capacity for adaptation. It is the skill built through repeated confrontation with failure. When our carefully reasoned hypotheses crumble under the weight of reality, we are forced into a state of radical presence. We must respond with everything we have right now, our eyes, our hands, our immediate judgment, rather than retreating to comfortable models that do not apply. The goal, then, is never merely to know the facts. It is to cultivate the inner agility that allows us to weave those facts into an effective response. The theoretical knowledge remains a valuable starting point, a language we can use to frame our thinking. But that language must always be translated into the practical dialect of doing. The realization hits with the force of physical work. Wisdom is not found in silence. It is forged in friction. It requires us to accept the beautiful awkwardness of imperfection, to embrace the moment where theory screams this cannot work and action whispers, it must be tried anyway. Only through this continuous cycle of hypothesis, failure, observation, and adjustment do we begin to construct something that is genuinely resilient, not just in its design, but in our own character. We learned from the stone that mere description is a shadow play. We saw from the storm's chaos that intellectual preparation only brings us to a fragile safety, never true resilience. And we faced the collapsed bridge which showed us that theory, magnificent as it may be, lacks the vital strength of lived application. All these moments led us back to one persistent question. If knowledge requires action to prove its worth, then where does that wisdom truly reside? Is it in the vast libraries we build for ourselves, or is it only forged within the heat and grit of immediate necessity? The old ways taught us how much we could memorize, but never showed us how deeply we could adapt. The maps always proved inadequate when the terrain shifted beneath our feet. We sought to understand the inner workings of things, breaking them down into components: chemistry, physics, philosophy. Yet, understanding a component does not grant us the skill to reassemble something complex and resilient. It is knowing the rules of hydraulics, but never feeling the drag of water on your bare hands. This realization forces us toward a deeper examination of what knowing truly means. We must move beyond defining knowledge as an accumulation of facts. Instead, we must consider it as an internalized capacity, a readiness within us to engage with novelty. The true wisdom is not the memory of a passage, but the practiced patience required when nothing seems to be happening at all. The lessons become tactile, almost physical. We begin to understand that learning is not a passive absorption process. It is a continuous act of adjustment. Consider the simple act of tending wood for fire. You may have read treatises on combustion and heat dynamics. You know the ideal arrangement of tinder and kindling. But until you kneel there, your hands blackened by soot and aching from the effort, that knowledge remains sterile theory. The subtle difference between a successful build and one that merely smolders is not found in the book. It is discovered through repeated failed attempts. The process itself becomes the primary teacher. It is the iterative cycle, hypothesis formed in thought, challenged by matter, failing upon execution, leading to an adjustment of premise, which then informs the next action. This loop, thought to doing, and doing back to revised thought, is the engine of true education. The goal is not achieving a perfect outcome, but mastering the reliable rhythm of correction. We are learning that competence, the kind that allows you to mend something complex or navigate unexpected currents, cannot be taught through lectures alone. It must be accrued by wrestling with reality until the pattern becomes muscle memory, the quiet understanding that speaks without needing definition. The intellectual mind grasps concepts, the skilled hand inhabits processes, and deep wisdom seems to reside where these two realms finally meet and merge. We turn our attention away from the pristine models of civilization toward the raw materials that demand respect: wood, water, stone. These things do not accept platitudes or perfectly reasoned arguments. They demand careful observation, measured effort, and an accepting readiness for imperfection. To truly know a craft is to be ready to sweat over its failures. It means recognizing that falling down is not merely a setback, but essential data points on the path toward mastery. The failure we encountered with the bridge was profoundly instructive. The flaw was never in our theoretical understanding of tensile strength. The flaw lay in neglecting the environmental variables: the slight creep of the wood under damp conditions, the unexpected shift in foundation weight, the limits of human stamina over time. These were unknowns that abstract knowledge could only predict so well. Only direct confrontation revealed their stubborn reality. Therefore, we must cultivate what some call situational intelligence. This is not simply having many facts. It is knowing which combination of available facts and physical capabilities is most effective in the moment at hand. It is the art of being perpetually unfinished, always ready to adjust the internal map based on the external landscape. The journey teaches us a deep humility. Our greatest vulnerability is our assumption that understanding equals control. The world has no such neat guarantee. We must dismantle this core belief and embrace the uncertainty inherent in every moment. To live wisely means accepting that some questions simply do not have theoretical answers, only behavioral ones. They demand action as their reply. Consider the dedicated artisan who spends hours perfecting a single joint. His skill is evident in the perfect fit, but his knowledge is embedded within thousands of precise movements. You could teach him geometry and stress testing for a lifetime, yet nothing would replicate the ingrained intuition that guides his chisel, that deep knowing that comes only from thousands of repetitive acts. That intuitive fluency is where theory gives way to true capability. We are moving past the question of whether knowledge exists without experience. The answer, through diligent doing and quiet failure, becomes clear. It cannot. Knowledge must pass through the fire of action. It must be cooled by the river of immediate reality. If we only study how a muscle moves, we remain intellectually informed but physically incapable. But when we perform the movement until it is second nature, that knowledge transforms into inherent capacity, a profound and resilient kind of wisdom. The education, ultimately, lies not in remembering what we read, but in becoming the person who can reliably adjust, endure, and adapt when reading provides no answers whatsoever. We have spent time examining the brittle nature of thought divorced from action. We learned that merely knowing a fact is not the same as possessing understanding. Theoretical knowledge, housed safely within books or crystallized in memory, offers us a profound comfort, a sense of control derived from prediction. But we also discovered that predictions are often flawed. They thrive only under ideal conditions and rarely survive contact with the unpredictable weight of reality. When all intellectual frameworks inevitably encounter friction, when a neat theory must contend with rough stone and shifting sand, the beautiful edifice of assumption begins to crack. We built our initial understanding on assumptions. Assumptions about stability, about predictable human nature, about the unchanging laws we have read in texts. These comforting scaffolds of assumed knowledge were always holding up more weight than they could bear. They required a certainty that does not exist outside of our own careful imagining. To assume something is true simply because it has been written down is to mistake the blueprint for the finished structure. It is to mistaking the map's legend for the actual landscape. The realization that theory itself carries its own weight proved to be almost a burden. Every academic discipline, Every meticulously crafted system of thought attempts to account for everything, believing it has charted every possible variable. But the world operates in shades of gray and sudden bursts of chaotic light. It ignores our neatly labeled categories. When we operate solely from theory, we are brittle. We know how a bridge should be built according to engineering principles, but that knowledge does not prepare us for the unexpected resistance of rotten timber or the slip of mud underfoot. Knowledge only tells you what was done well before. It cannot teach you how to adapt when everything fails. The true crisis, therefore, is not ignorance itself, but the dangerous confidence derived from assuming that our accumulated understanding provides a perfect protective shield against life's inherent disorder. We assume pattern where there is coincidence. We assume consequence where there is merely chance. And this weight of assumption is what finally slows us down, forcing a pause, demanding self-correction. If knowledge were simply accumulation, a vast filing cabinet of facts, we would feel secure enough to close the lid and walk away from life's complexity. But we understand now that true wisdom does not derive from closure. It derives from constant openness, from an ability to shed comfortable assumptions when confronted by immediate need. Wisdom is fundamentally provisional. It holds itself together with nothing more than skepticism toward its own permanence. Consider the weight of habit as a sort of assumption. We assume our habitual responses are optimal, that when stress hits, we will react predictably, safely. Yet the moments that truly challenge us force a complete rewrite of those self-imposed rules. They demand a flexibility that goes beyond recalling a definition or reciting a dogma. It requires adapting motor skills, adjusting emotional presence, and formulating novel solutions in real time. The intellectual journey has thus become profoundly humbling. We have moved from the academic quest for definitive answers to the difficult work of embracing meaningful uncertainty. The comfort zone of pure theory must be abandoned. To learn anything truly valuable is not simply to acquire a principle. It is to submit that principle to the brutal, unforgiving testing ground of lived action. We must begin to recognize that our most cherished concepts of justice, of purpose, of self, are themselves just elaborately built theories. They are magnificent attempts to impose order on flux, necessary tools for human communication and survival. But like all models, they break down when the reality they attempt to describe is more complex than their internal logic allows. The goal then becomes not perfect understanding, but maximum resilience. It is about building a mind that treats its own certainties as preliminary hypotheses, ready to be discarded or revised by the slightest physical nudge from the world around it. The assumption we must finally set down, most gently and most painfully, is that thoughtful consideration alone provides sufficient armor against suffering or failure. The deepest truths are never found in contemplation. They are forged only in moments of genuine struggle, where our careful assumptions fail, forcing us to react not with textbook knowledge, but with sheer, grounded being. It is in the necessary confrontation with what we do not know, the true weight of ignorance, that the capacity for genuine wisdom finally takes shape. This continuous state of challenging self-belief is the only path away from intellectual complacency and toward a deep, embodied understanding that cannot be learned merely by reading. We have seen the limits of books. We have stood with our hands empty, realizing that detailed knowledge is merely a map, beautiful and exhaustive, but utterly silent when faced with the actual terrain. Memory itself proved unreliable, a tapestry rewoven in the privacy of thought, susceptible to forgetting and flattering self-deception. Every theoretical premise we held felt less like solid ground beneath our feet and more like sand, shifting slightly with the slightest breath of uncertainty. The last moments have forced us into uncomfortable truths. We found that simply knowing about a storm does not prepare you for its spray. It only prepares your mind to feel clever while standing safely on shore. Intellectual comfort is perhaps the greatest intellectual danger. It allows us to gather facts and systems, creating elaborate mental architectures that are magnificent in their theoretical perfection, but collapse into dust when confronted by the unexpected weight of lived reality. The true test of wisdom has always been found at the edge of what we understand, the places where our definitions fail and our certainties dissolve. And these edges rarely feel pleasant. They demand friction. They ask for discomfort. To learn something profound, it seems, one must first willingly endure a small measure of pain or resistance. We had hoped that wisdom would arrive with the neat certainty of an answer found at the close of study, inscribed on the final page of a great text. But life teaches us otherwise. Wisdom is not an object to be acquired. It is a state to be cultivated in moments of struggle and inconvenience. It is forged not in quiet contemplation, but in resistance. The most enduring truths seem to hide where our initial efforts fail, in the cold water that shocks the skin back to attention, in the deep fatigue earned by purposeful labor, or in the moment we feel completely outmatched by a natural force. This confrontation with discomfort is not merely punitive. It is profoundly educational. It rips away the comfortable assumption of control. When the body tires, when the intellect stalls, and when all carefully prepared knowledge proves insufficient, something deeper surfaces. This is the wisdom that whispers to us, be present. Pay attention to the immediate resistance. Our minds are powerful prediction engines. We spend so much time calculating risks and predicting outcomes based on past data. The history of the storm, the chemistry of the stone, the arc of failure in the bridge design. But the world does not operate on predicted probability. It operates moment by moment. It is fluid, resistant, and utterly nonlinear. The profound lesson here is one of radical acceptance of uncertainty. We must cease treating life as a solvable equation. Instead, we must treat it like a vast laboratory where every minor stumble, every cold spray, every wasted effort is simply data, raw feedback on how our current model of reality needs adjusting. The luxury of theory, the ability to observe without acting, blinds us to the necessary synergy between knowing and doing. To know something in isolation is merely potential energy. To integrate that knowledge into a strenuous action is the realization of force. That friction is where wisdom resides. It means finding comfort not in solutions, but in observation. It demands that we move beyond asking what it means to be wise, toward simply being open enough to accept whatever discomfort life places before us. For only when our expectations are shattered by genuine effort, by real consequence, do we finally begin to build something resilient within ourselves. We learn not from the beautiful theories, but from the messy aftermath of our own imperfections. This is the arduous work, acknowledging that nothing is certain, and that every assumed truth must be tested against the grit of daily existence. Wisdom is simply a highly refined capacity for adjustment. It is an internal mechanism, trained by discomfort, to keep pace with the unpredictable rhythm of life. We stood at the edge of understanding. We had explored the map and seen its limits. We saw that simply having information did not guarantee wisdom. Intellectual knowledge, we learned, is often a comfortable edifice built upon unchallenged assumptions. It provides a sense of certainty, a false comfort, that the real world quickly dismantles with the first unexpected force. The core question remains, is genuine knowing dependent on mere storage, or must it be forged in the crucible of action? Over weeks spent testing ourselves against failure, we began to grasp that theory and practice are not separate domains. They are two sides of the same coin. They require constant interaction. We watched the life unfolding around us. A child laughing while chasing a stone through the dust was engaged in an effortless flow. An artisan carved wood with muscle memory perfected by years of repetitive challenge. Neither possessed a volume filled with academic texts, yet both demonstrated a profound and immediate knowledge of their environment, a skill that resonated far deeper than any definition found in a book. The true realization struck us while observing this seamless interaction between mind and body. Knowledge was not simply something to be gathered. It was a capacity, an adaptive ability. It was the quick, flexible resonance between what we believed ourselves to know and what our hands were capable of doing at that very moment. This is the ripple effect. Imagine a theory regarding hydraulics. How much pressure is required for water to flow through a given material over time? You can calculate this perfectly on paper, giving precise equations for force and resistance. But calculation cannot account for the shift in the riverbed, or the sudden blockage of debris hidden beneath the surface, or the slight temperature change that alters the viscosity of the liquid. The theory is flawless. The application will inevitably encounter chaos. Only when the theoretical model meets the unpredictable reality of the rushing water does true wisdom emerge. It forces the theory to be flexible. It demands humility from the mind. Theory must yield to life's demands. This moment shifted my understanding completely. We had been taught to view knowledge as an acquisition, a point to reach. But perhaps it is not an arrival at all. Perhaps knowing is simply the continuous process of adjustment. When we look closely enough at these human interactions, this fundamental principle becomes clear. Competence, the ability to function effectively in unforeseen circumstances, is the real marker of wisdom. It is what separates a person who merely reads about surviving a blizzard from one who has actually felt the cold, adjusted their gear, and navigated by failing light. The knowledge gathered through contemplation was necessary, yes. It provided the initial framework, the educated hypothesis. But that framework remains fragile unless it is constantly subjected to the harsh testing grounds of lived experience. Experience does not merely confirm theory, it rebuilds it, stronger and more resilient. The error encountered in the field teaches a different lesson than any textbook chapter. I started to see our entire intellectual journey this way, a continuous feedback loop. We form an idea, we take that idea into the world, we attempt something using that idea, and what happens back dictates how we adjust the initial understanding. The failure is not an end point. It is necessary data. It is the correction factor that refines the hypothesis until it aligns with reality. This iterative cycle, thought leading to action, resulting in adjusted thought, is the engine of genuine learning. The profound shift was accepting that knowing was less about certainty and more about dynamic flexibility. To be truly knowledgeable means admitting what you do not know and having the readiness to pivot instantly when faced with ambiguity. It is maintaining a state of perpetual novice curiosity, even after decades of supposed expertise. This required shedding the comforting weight of assumption, the belief that because something worked once, or because it is written down somewhere, it must always work. The journey was fundamentally about moving from intellectual assurance to practical responsiveness. From believing we could predict the future based on our reading, to accepting only our ability to skillfully react in the present moment. The highest form of wisdom, I realized, is not a solved equation. It is an open question approached with disciplined engagement and radical acceptance of uncertainty. It is letting the river guide your hands, rather than insisting that your mind dictates every turn. We have spent time examining the sheer weight of knowledge, the vast libraries of human thought. We have seen that intelligence is often celebrated for its depth, its ability to recall facts, and its architectural complexity. But I want us to pause here at this quiet edge of the water and consider a crucial distinction we have perhaps overlooked. There is a great myth that persists in our culture. The idea that mere intellect, pure, unapplied theory, is sufficient for a meaningful life. That if we simply read enough or study hard enough, all the answers will magically appear ready to be used when needed. We built up an entire understanding of knowledge based on what it resembles: neatly filed documents, elegant equations, comprehensive historical narratives. It feels orderly and total. But I ask you today to look past the appearance of completeness. Is a mind that knows every name for every type of fish truly more capable than one whose hands can simply catch supper? Is encyclopedic recall equivalent to true wisdom? I believe not. The scholar, magnificent in his accumulated memory, possesses an impressive intellectual architecture. He knows the history of the nets, the migration patterns of the school, and the taxonomy of every species nearby. His mind is a map of exquisite detail, covering every known peak and river bend. Yet, knowledge stored purely within, pure intellect, is fundamentally divorced from the act of living itself. It is potential energy without the circuit to release it. The master craftsperson tells a different story. He might not know the precise name or the geological origin of this particular type of driftwood, nor can he recite the perfect formula for its resistance. His knowledge resides elsewhere, in his hands, in the muscle memory developed through thousands of repetitions, and in the subtle reading of the material itself. His expertise is intuitive. It is a responsive knowing. It emerges not from memorization, but from deep, engaged interaction. This contrast should challenge us to define what we truly mean when we speak of knowing. When I thought I was criticizing theory for being insufficient, I was only looking at one end of the spectrum. We are missing the middle ground entirely, the point where pure intellect meets skilled action. Knowledge cannot simply be theoretical accumulation, nor can it solely be raw instinct. It must traverse a critical pathway between them. The problem with relying on pure theory is that it often breeds a kind of intellectual arrogance. It creates the illusion of certainty. The scholar can predict outcomes with remarkable precision because his model relies on established patterns and perfect variables. But reality, as we have seen repeatedly, refuses to be predictable. Life is messy. It introduces friction points and unforeseen resistances. Intellect provides the script, the knowledge of what should happen based on past observation. But experience provides the improvisational genius required when the script fails, when the weather changes, or when a variable we never accounted for suddenly emerges. The map drawn by the purest intellect is beautiful, but it has no understanding of the mud underfoot, the sudden shift in the river's current, or the unexpected detour around a landslide. It only records what was seen before. True wisdom, therefore, lies not in maximizing stored data, but in optimizing adaptive capacity. It is the ability to take the knowledge gleaned from your studies, the theory of hydraulics, for example, and immediately modify it when the water level drops unexpectedly, requiring a structure that you had not budgeted for. The intellect gives you the tools. Experience teaches you how and when they will break. This means we must actively dismantle the myth of pure intellect. Intelligence is a tool, an invaluable one, but only when wielded in partnership with the grit of reality. It cannot be its own goal. When we value sheer academic knowledge above all else, we risk becoming scholars who are paralyzed by overanalysis. We know so much about potential failures that we forget how to simply try. We become masters of thought rather than masters of action. The greatest failure is not ignorance. It is the belief in one's own complete intellectual preparation for a world that never behaves according to textbook logic. To truly learn, one must always maintain an open channel between the library and the field. The abstract model must constantly be tested by the messy vitality of the physical moment. We are not meant merely to accumulate knowledge like rare minerals. We are meant to become capable beings, adaptable systems designed for continuous negotiation with uncertainty. And that conversation requires both eloquent theory and calloused, patient hands. We have traced the lines of knowing, moving from the comfortable silence of the library to the harsh clarity found in the field. We learned that theory is a skeleton, a necessary structure that gives form to our thoughts. But bones alone cannot sustain life. The true architecture of wisdom requires flesh and blood, requiring adaptation itself. For too long, we have operated under a subtle delusion. That knowledge can be neatly separated from action. That reading about resilience prepares us for the storm, or that mapping out a journey guarantees its successful completion. But life resists being organized by careful indices and theoretical models. Reality is messy. It contains unforeseen variables, unpredictable resistances, and moments where the best-laid plans simply dissolve into dust. What we discovered in our recent explorations was something far more powerful than mere fact retention or perfect recall. We saw that true competence, true sagacity, is not a static state of being. It is a dynamic integration. It is the moment the map must adjust itself to match the unyielding truth of the territory. And this brings us back to theory, but now viewed through an entirely new lens. Theory is not the destination. It is merely the starting assumption. It is our best attempt at predicting the world based on what we have observed and read. But by assuming that prediction equals certainty, we commit a profound philosophical error. The mistake is thinking that understanding precedes capacity. We think, if I understand enough, then I will be prepared enough. If my concept of gravity is sound, then when I stand near a precipice, I will inherently know how to navigate it without falling. Yet the hands must move, and the mind must adjust in real time. The most powerful understanding we can achieve is therefore not found in the isolated study of concepts, but in the immediate feedback loop between thought and doing. This is what we call informed action, the deliberate process of letting theory bend to meet the needs of messy reality. Consider planning a complex undertaking, building furniture, navigating unfamiliar terrain, or perhaps even simply coordinating a difficult conversation. Initially, one relies solely on stored knowledge. One pulls out blueprints, one recalls best practices. These are valuable tools, organizing principles that reduce initial chaos into manageable steps. But the process quickly introduces resistance. The wood is warped in an unexpected way. The riverbed shifts course where the map suggested otherwise. A team member struggles with a skill we assumed was universally present. At these points, the pure theoretical framework buckles under the weight of unpredictable variables. The original plan becomes obsolete. It is here that theory must become flexible. It cannot dictate. It must inform. The informed individual does not cling dogmatically to the blueprint merely because they read it. Instead, they hold the knowledge as a set of adaptable parameters, a sophisticated initial guess, and then use their senses and physical engagement to test those parameters instantly. The mind becomes less of an archive seeking certainty and more of a fluid instrument seeking responsiveness. It learns to anticipate not what should happen according to established rules, but what will happen given the materials at hand and the immediate pressure of the moment. This is synthesis in action. The crucial shift, therefore, is moving from knowing the answer to mastering the process of inquiry itself. Wisdom ceases to be a collected body of facts, the scholar's dusty volumes, and becomes an adaptive capability, the craftsman's skilled touch. It is the ability to hold conflicting pieces of information, acknowledge uncertainty, and yet still execute a purposeful, informed movement. This integration requires radical presence. You cannot effectively blend theory and experience if your mind is dwelling on the lessons learned yesterday, or worried about the inevitable difficulties tomorrow. The theoretical model must anchor you enough to guide your efforts, but your awareness must remain entirely rooted in the now, observing how the immediate material resists, shifts, or supports your actions. The informed action is therefore not simply applying a rule. It is constantly performing a delicate negotiation between abstract principle and concrete reality. It means asking, does my grand theory account for this particular knot in the rope? Or does my assumption about the local topography fail to recognize this necessary detour? It takes courage, this informed action. It requires humility, the willingness to admit that even our most carefully reasoned theories are provisional, subject to revision by a simple slip of wood or an unexpected gust of wind. The knowledge is there, stored and polished, but the wisdom must be earned in sweat, through error, and validated through continuous adjustment. This cycle, this constant back and forth, theory informing action, which generates data refining theory, is not merely how we learn. It is what fundamentally constitutes being wise. It means accepting that true mastery is not knowing everything, but learning how to adjust when one knows nothing at all. We have walked through the myths of knowing. We learned that mere accumulation of facts is not wisdom. It is not enough to memorize a constellation of theories or to recall every passage from an ancient text. That vast body of theoretical knowledge, while useful, can be dangerously misleading if treated as absolute truth. It is a map, a perfectly detailed, beautiful drawing of the world, but maps are not the territory itself. The journey so far has shown us that intellectual comfort often breeds a subtle form of laziness. We prefer to predict difficulty from the safety of study, rather than facing the unpredictable reality it describes. We have seen that even when we feel fully prepared, armed with comprehensive knowledge, the moment arrives. The storm hits, the bridge fails, the puzzle resists, and our perfect theory proves brittle. The lesson was harsh but necessary. Competence is not a static state. It is a process. It requires engagement. The mind is designed for abstraction, but life demands adaptability. Our intellectual capacity yearns for certainty, wishing to categorize every outcome and predict every consequence with simple logic. Yet the world does not offer neat answers. Reality introduces friction, surprise, and resistance. This realization forces us into a cycle of learning that has no beginning or end. It is circular. We start with an assumption, a theory built in comfort, derived from observation or study. This initial thought is our hypothesis, our best guess about how the world works or how we ought to act. But this hypothesis cannot be validated by reflection alone. It must meet matter. The cycle then demands action. It requires us to take that theoretical blueprint and apply it in the messy, unpredictable theater of reality. We attempt something. We build a temporary structure. We make an informed decision under pressure. We engage with a difficult person. This is where true education happens, when theory meets physical resistance. The immediate result is rarely perfection. Most attempts will falter. The bridge built solely from academic principles collapses. The plan devised in isolation proves inadequate for the unexpected variables of the moment. Failure, therefore, is not merely an endpoint. It is crucial data. It is the only honest feedback loop we have. When that failure occurs, when our perfect assumption breaks under pressure, we are forced back to reflection. But this time, the contemplation is radically different. We are no longer admiring a pristine theory on paper. We are studying the wreckage. We examine what went wrong in the real world, recognizing that our original assumptions were incomplete, missing a vital variable, the weight of wind, the resistance of imperfect material, the unpredictable nature of human emotion. The adjustment phase is where wisdom takes root. We do not simply discard the failed theory, we refine it. We integrate the data from the experience into the theoretical model. This creates a revised hypothesis, a richer, more grounded understanding that accounts for the messy edges of existence. This adjusted understanding then feeds us back into action. It is this endless loop. Hypothesis leads to action, action generates data, data modifies hypothesis. That defines true learning. We move from passive knowing, merely holding facts in our minds, to active becoming. Wisdom is not a stored answer. It is the engine of continuous modification. It is the refined mechanism that allows us to ask better questions based on failure. The cycle confirms that knowledge cannot exist without experience, because knowledge, fundamentally speaking, is simply pattern recognition applied to lived data. To truly know something, to possess genuine understanding, is not merely to read about it, but to have grappled with its consequences yourself. You must navigate the emotional weight of making the mistake to understand the necessary caution of avoiding it. You must feel the effort required to move a heavy object to appreciate the physics of leverage. Only through this full circuit, thought leading to action and failure leading to insight, does potential understanding transform into resilient wisdom. We must learn to love the cycle itself. We must be comfortable with being beginners, embracing the initial state of profound ignorance that precedes every hypothesis. We must view every challenge not as a test of our current knowledge, but as necessary fuel for the next iteration of thought. For it is only by acknowledging our limits in action that we gain the humility required to truly learn. This cycle demands presence. It requires us to detach from the satisfaction of having an answer and instead commit fully to the messy process of inquiry itself. The goal shifts entirely, not to achieve knowledge, but to become a continually improving instrument for understanding. This is the only sustainable path toward a life that feels both deeply thoughtful and profoundly capable. We have spent this journey tracing the boundaries of knowledge. We began by questioning if understanding requires merely reading the map, or if it demands walking the difficult, imperfect terrain itself. We learned that a book provides structure, certainly, but structures are inert. They hold potential, yes, but they do not generate life. The process we observed, the failed bridge, the attempt to analyze cold water purely through chemical equations, the unreliable whispers of memory, all pointed toward a profound conclusion. Knowing something is fundamentally different from being able to do it. The intellectual mind excels at pattern recognition. We can build magnificent models of reality. We can construct entire philosophical systems based on logic and deduction, creating perfect internal worlds where everything fits neatly into its proper category. This capacity for systemic thinking is a gift of unparalleled power. But let us be honest with ourselves. These systems, however beautiful or vast they may seem, are ultimately abstractions. They are polished glass reflections of the world, not the messy, vital substance itself. And this distinction between mere knowing and actual capability is where the true journey lies. The comfortable philosopher often mistakes preparation for presence. He assumes that because he has read enough about the storm, about barometric pressure, wave dynamics, the history of coastal erosion, that he possesses immunity to its force. This assumption is a dangerous one. Theory offers comfort. It provides an intellectual safety net that convinces us we are ready when, in fact, our muscles, our reflexes, and our judgment have never been tested under genuine duress. The deep realization dawns that what we truly seek is not the accumulation of facts. It is something deeper, more resilient. It is capacity. Capability is the ability to adjust. It is the internal machinery that allows you to absorb a piece of unforeseen data and immediately revise your operational model. It is fluid. Unlike knowledge, which tends towards static definitions, this flow resists definition itself. Think of skilled craftsmanship. The master carpenter does not pull out a diagram detailing every joint stress point or listing the tensile strength of oak versus maple. He simply acts. His knowledge is somatic. It lives in his hands, in the rhythm of his breath, and in the muscle memory honed by thousands of iterations of failure and correction. When he encounters wood that has warped slightly due to unexpected humidity, he does not consult a textbook chapter on seasonal wood variations. He adjusts his grip, changes his angle, and compensates instantly. His knowledge is woven into the very fabric of his being. It is action internalized. The ancient wisdom suggests we often confuse understanding with competence. We mistake the elegant architecture of an idea for the physical endurance required to build it under pressure. The mind can simulate difficulty. It can write a poem about despair, or deduce the ethical ramifications of suffering. But simulation is merely thought. It requires no expenditure of genuine will against true resistance. Therefore, we must redefine what wisdom means. It cannot be found solely in the library's dusty aisles, nor exclusively in comfortable contemplation. True wisdom, the kind that allows a person to navigate sudden loss, unexpected conflict, or irreversible change with dignity and effectiveness, is competence in action. It is the cultivated adaptive capacity. It is the understanding that potential must be activated by experience. The goal of life, then, shifts from achieving certainty through study to mastering responsiveness through practice. We are not aiming for a finished state of knowledge. We are cultivating a continuous readiness. This means accepting that there will always be gaps in our theoretical models, and gaps between what we understand and what we can physically achieve. These gaps are not failures. They are the vital data points required for growth. To become capable is to commit oneself to perpetual inquiry, not just of books, but of life itself. It requires moving beyond the intellectual comfort zone, the sweet illusion that perfect planning equals guaranteed success. Instead, it demands immersion in uncertainty. The truly wise person is therefore characterized less by what they know and more by their humility regarding what they do not know. They carry a mind open to continuous revision, ready to discard the elegant but flawed hypothesis when reality presents undeniable counter-evidence. The journey, ultimately, is about transformation. It is about moving from being a collection of stored facts, a knowledge container, to becoming a resilient mechanism. A mechanism that can receive input, process error, and modify its output under duress. We must stop asking, "What do I know?" and start challenging ourselves with the far more demanding question, "What am I capable of?" This shift in focus is not merely philosophical, it is profoundly practical. It demands a radical realignment of effort, pulling us out of safe theory and into difficult, messy participation. This continuous feedback loop, the hypothesis leading to action, which generates data, forcing the revision of the original hypothesis, is the architecture of being fully human and truly wise. The education is never complete. It simply becomes one with living. And in that continual state of becoming capable, we find a depth of understanding far more solid than any book could ever provide. We have walked through the ruins of certainty. We have traced the vast, beautiful libraries of human thought, only to find that inside those magnificent halls, pure knowledge waits, preserved, untouched, but utterly inert. For so long, we believed that understanding was simply a matter of absorption, that the mind could be filled with enough facts, theories, and historical narratives to guarantee mastery over life itself. We treated knowledge as currency. The more you possessed, the richer you were, the safer your future seemed. But our journey has led us away from the comforting safety of scrolls and printed pages, out into the unpredictable field where life actually happens. The wisdom we sought was not housed in books. It was written into the creases of our palms, etched by effort, scarred by necessary failure. We learned that a map is never the territory. A theory, no matter how elegant or flawlessly argued, is but a shadow of reality. To live intellectually is to mistake the understanding of a problem for the capacity to solve it. This distinction is critical. It forces us to abandon the illusion that contemplation alone can furnish us with resilience. We have seen what happens when we only know how things should work, when we predict the storm based on charts, but never actually feel its spray. We built intricate models of human behavior and natural systems, predicting outcomes with exhaustive detail. Yet those predictions dissolved at the slightest touch of chaos. Our knowledge remained elegant in theory, brittle in practice. The struggle was always to bridge that chasm between what we think and what must be done. If understanding is simply mental recall, then when faced with a genuinely novel moment, a surprise encounter, an unexpected resource limitation, a genuine act of human unpredictability, our stored wisdom fails us entirely. We are left intellectually prepared but functionally helpless. And this realization, the weight of it, was deeply uncomfortable. It meant that all our previous certainties were merely sophisticated guesses, beautifully packaged but fundamentally unproven by the grit of existence itself. If competence is required for living, then knowledge must be redefined as nothing more than potential energy. Potential energy requires a catalyst, friction, struggle, resistance, to transform into kinetic action. We have spent weeks refining this concept. That wisdom is not a static repository to be emptied and filled, but a continuous, dynamic process of revision. It is the internal ability to adjust when everything has gone wrong, combined with the grace to try again when it seems impossible. This understanding moves us past mere knowing and into being able. The greatest failure we faced was not physical, it was epistemological, the profound failure to trust our own active engagement with reality. We kept waiting for a moment of quiet clarity, believing that the answer would simply arrive through contemplation. But true wisdom demands participation. It demands that you immerse yourself in the immediate difficulty. It insists that the only effective laboratory is the world itself. Therefore, how do we move forward? How do we take this profound realization that our greatest asset is not what we know, but how quickly and intelligently we can adapt when we are wrong and apply it to the remaining days of our lives? We must stop treating life as a subject to be studied and start treating it as the curriculum itself. This shift demands an unprecedented level of vulnerability. It means approaching every conversation, every task, every moment of inconvenience not as something that happens to us, but as necessary data that allows us to revise our internal model of reality. We must become perpetual students. The question we can no longer afford to ask passively is whether knowledge exists without experience. Instead, the actionable query, the question we must now live by is, how shall I choose to act in this next moment, given only what I know now? This is not a problem solved with reading. It is a habit built through relentless doing. It requires that we shed the comfort of established doctrine and embrace the beautiful, frightening uncertainty that lies just outside our current certainty. Let us therefore commit ourselves fully to being in conversation with life, to embracing the necessary questions, the insoluble puzzles, the moments when all theory collapses and only adaptive action remains. Our education is not complete. It has simply become ceaselessly active. The calling is to live not merely in time, but skillfully with time, making every experience a deliberate act of reinvention. This continuous process of hypothesizing, failing, observing, and revising, this adaptive cycle, is the only true path